Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to rewind back to 2010 when the utility tax, which has been the subject of much angst and gnashing of teeth since, because I've not said anything publicly about it until now. But at the time, 2010, when some of us were first elected, it was before the first council and training session when we were presented with a budget with a $3 million deficit. But beyond that, we could immediately see there was more to it than that, because the out years, 5 years out, showed decreasing revenues and increasing expenditures and a steadily declining contingency fund. So there were some structural changes that needed to be made. The utility tax or fee was implemented at that time to bring half of the deficit down. The other half was treated by cuts in personnel, not filling vacancies and such. And then we went to attack the structural deficit that we have, the structural deficiencies in the way the town of Oro Valley was being run until that time. The utility tax had been an issue before this current council was elected, when they had set a sunset clause on it and failed to act on it because apparently it was needed, and still a $3 million deficit turned up. Greg Caton and members of the council, I know he was talking to me about how we were presented with this deficit. I think it was 4 or 5 options. Stacy might tell us, was it 5 options? All taxes that could be implemented. It was almost a fait accompli with us. We took the least onerous. We adopted a utility tax that was compatible with all the surrounding communities. And that utility tax helped us. We had a recession, you recall, the Great Recession, I believe they called it, and the utility tax helped pull us through that recession to where now, instead of a $116 million cap on the budget, which we had in 2010, to a $93 million cap on the budget now, we have a small surplus. We are recovering. We're not recovered, but we're recovering. And as I mentioned, we talked to Greg Caton before this time about somehow dialing back this utility tax over time. But now, here we are talking about it, and I appreciate the opportunity to set the plate for us tonight with this subject.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Adler's point about diversifying revenue. Soon after this council was seated in 2010, we began a series of economic summits with business leaders and community leaders. And we opened conversation with them and listened to what they had to say. And one of the key points that came out of that first session was that we needed to diversify our revenue, because we had, as a town, historically been so dependent on sales tax revenue and state shared revenues, and we were in the midst of a crisis. We used to issue over 400 single residency family building permits a year. We're not going to be doing that anymore. Mr. Adler brings up that very same point. The utility tax, frankly, I haven't got that much feedback that people are upset about it, because they see that we're using public money for public good. And, you know, for instance, we have a 50%, correct me if I'm wrong, contingency fund. We know that we're going to be spending 2.1 for TEP, and we have another project that's coming forward that could take another $2 million. And in fact, last night, as the council liaison to the Park and Recreation Advisory Board, I can tell you that that body unanimously approved a project that we have on the planning to put some fields into Naranha Park. And 2 fields, Greg's staff has worked on that. They've done a great job. They're making it look possible that we can do that, and that's using public money for public good. Without that, we would not be able to consider these projects, let alone the CIP needs that the town has. We know what those are. It's over $200 million over the next 15 years. Talk about long-term obligations that we have. However, I disagree that we shouldn't talk about this in generalities. I believe that when we enacted this utility tax, we told the residents that we would watch it, we would monitor it, we would consider. And I think that that's exactly what you do when suddenly you have a $1.7 million surplus, which we were very happy with, and a 50% contingency reserve fund. We have to let the public know that we are watching, and that we'll consider its necessity. However, I think the time to do that is during the time that we work with the staff and the town manager in the 5-year financial forecasting, and it's just a way of communicating with our residents that we're watching is how I feel about it.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Hornat?
You know, I listened to the financial report for this month and the forecast for the upcoming year, and I see that we're forecasting a $245,000 excess. That's a pretty thin margin, frankly. I pulled the 5-year forecast out of the budget, and I love 5-year forecasts, and I don't see anything going up. I see things going down, and I ran some numbers on the utility tax itself, which is a total at 4% of $2.9 million a year. So a 1% reduction, just 1%, or I shouldn't say a 1% reduction by a percentage point to 3% would reduce our income by $720,000 a year. We don't even have that in the next year, let alone the next 5 years if you look at the charts. So I don't know. I don't know how we could possibly. I would say this, and it's a blanket statement, and anybody here doesn't want to correct me. I don't think anybody here likes taxes. And if we didn't have to have them, we wouldn't have them. In this case, we've got a tax that we need. It was unfortunate that we needed it, but you can see that structurally it has really put us on a completely different keel for what, $1.4 million a year. I just don't see any point in even considering a reduction. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.